So I'm going to put in a quick plug. We are doing some trainings coming up, so check out our website. If you get notices like the email blast, take a close look. We have circle training coming up later this month. We have that is free. Domestic relations training is coming up in May, late May into June, part online, part in person. Brian Pappas's training. We'll have a very small fee for that. We're still trying to work through some budget pieces on that. We have a refresher for circle training coming up as well, early April. So if you did the circle training years ago and want to refresh and reconnect, that is a great place to start. And then late summer into fall, we'll do another 40-hour training, which we do charge for, but we can offer some reduced prices for those who are looking to volunteer with us. And I do the training for that one. So if you know folks who want to be involved with this kind of work, please send them our way. And we always, some of you know this, we always try to work with folks financially because we want people to be involved in this. So if price is a barrier, they just need to talk to the staff, myself, Jermaine, any person on the staff, and have that conversation. We are in need of volunteers, so please keep that in mind. Okay, so I'm going to transition, make sure that I have the PowerPoint ready. I have so many things open on my screen that sometimes I'm fearful of what you all might see. Okay, PowerPoint. So this is nothing, this is a PowerPoint presentation that I have used many times before. And we developed it because it took information right from the 40-hour training material, because we get requests from organizations, particularly those who are dealing with client services or providing services to the public. They want quick skills on how to handle conflict. So there was a notion that some of the techniques, or many of the techniques that we use in mediation, could be used for people at the front desk, could be used over the phone, could be used in those client meetings. So we've put together this PowerPoint, but nothing that you hear will be brand new to you all if you took your training at our DRC. We thought today's topic would be helpful because sometimes we just need a refresh. As mediators, especially if you've been doing it for a long time, we get stuck in our modalities. Like, I know that when I use this or that technique, it always works for me, and we forget to use other techniques. I'm going to say also, because I have to look at the data, I am not seeing a great slippage of settlements, but which is okay if settlement rates are not high. You're not in there to force people to settle. But because I see some shifting in those numbers, it makes me think about what happens in your sessions, and maybe the hostility, the polarization, the principled nature that we see in small claims. I've been hosting some small claims cases this year, and we see that people get stuck. And I'm thinking we have to really think about techniques and what we're doing as facilitative mediators to help to see if people can get unstuck. So this was a review of that. So I'm gonna walk through the presentation. So as a reminder, we do facilitative mediation. It is considered private. It is a voluntary dispute resolution process. And as mediators, we're the neutral third party that help people identify the issues, develop options for resolving those issues, and finding resolutions acceptable to the people. So again, we're facilitating. We're not directing. We're not telling people what to do. We don't give opinions or recommendations. We got a inquiry even this morning asking us to host their case and give an opinion, a review and an opinion of financial matters. We had to turn them away. We do not do that. We are strictly in the space of facilitating. Oh, where are my slides? The mediator does a lot of stuff, and we talk about this in training, but I don't think we spent enough time as I was reviewing for today. Mediators are good at listening. We are listening for so much, and I recognize that that can be a bit challenging on Zoom. But we're listening not only to the words that people say, the facial expressions that they give, maybe the body language that we're able to pick up on. Reframing is really one of the gifts of mediation. We frame issues in a way that help people have some clarity in moving forward. And it's neutral reframing. So when people say things that are charged emotionally or using profanity or using adjectives, we reframe that information. We are sensitive to those strongly felt values, and we deal with complex factual material, and we're present and persistent in that. So basically what that means is that people give us all of this information, and in a very short period of time, we've got to chunk it down in smaller bites so that people can hear it differently. We can move them from such a complex ball of wax to something that's more manageable, but we're not discounting or removing their values. We recognize that they come to the mediation space being really charged about something. Their values have been breached in some kind of way. Someone didn't pay me money, and I believe that we pay our debts. Someone damaged my property and didn't take responsibility of it. So we hear that when we're mediating. The power differences in the negotiating process we're sensitive to. Power imbalance is a thing in conflict because that's part of how we assert ourselves in conflict. We want to gain and control and have power. So we recognize that and we do our best in balancing that power. I'm wondering, as a discussion question, how does that work in a Zoom space for you? I, again, was observing and coordinating a few small claims mediation during our transition time. And I saw some power dynamics happening with a couple cases that I worked on, and I had to really work on that during the intake phase and during those pre-mediation phone calls. And I'm just wondering how that plays out for you. As a mediator, we want to earn trust of ourselves in the process. There were times we have to ask people to trust the process. It's okay. It may seem foreign. We have to keep in mind that many people that we work with have never had a collaborative model of problem solving experience. They have gone to court, they have dealt with dispute resolution systems in the workplace, maybe in the community, in the court system that did not rely on collaborative approaches. People get stuck in their positions, so we have to help them understand their needs. This is something I've been saying since my very early days of learning mediation. I used it when my son was a toddler. What do you need? Not what do you want? You know, really helping him shift his thinking. That child, by the way, who was 2.5 when I started working at the DRC, is 24 now. And I still talk about what do you want versus what do you need? And we have to help people make that transition for themselves through and manage all of the emotion that comes with that. Identifying the issues that cannot be mediated. There may be some issues on the table or that were brought forth by the parties that just don't fit within the structure of the mediation that day. For instance, a case that I was working with, the party contracted a service at their home, outdoor service, and that service did some damage to the neighbor's yard. And the party, the plaintiff, really wanted to negotiate how to fix the neighbor's yard. That was not an issue that we can mediate. The neighbor was not a part of the case, was not identified on any of the court paperwork, was not even at the mediation. So we had to continue, you know, to put that barrier there that I know that you're concerned and your neighbor relationship is very important to you, but the neighbor is not here. So this contractor can work with the neighbor individually and work out however that case is going, or your neighbor can take that contractor to court as well. but we had to put a barrier there. Then we help folks create those options, identify the principles and criteria that will guide decision making. What's important to them? What is needed? What are their interests? So in this particular case that I was assisting with, the home owner wanted the damage to be repaired within a certain timeline to get ready for what was important to that homeowner, the grandchildren visiting in the summer. So we were able to work through the conversation and generate options that were connected to a timeline that can get things prepared for the summer. So all of these things are happening in mediation. As a mediator, you're sort of navigating and directing that dialogue to hit on these points. So what's in our toolbox? What's in the toolkit? Remaining neutral and impartial. We have to treat people the same. That doesn't mean that you have to be so stoic or stoic. I'm a very animated person. For those who know me, I express myself fully, but I have to be conscious that that expression to one party is also there for the other party. So I don't shut one party down by not talking to them at all or not giving them the eye contact. Another tool is that we balance that power at the table. Now the staff are thinking about this as well. When we get these case referrals and we think about who's going to be in the session, be it a mediation or a circle, we think about what power dynamics might be there. In small claims cases, it might be a business owner and a consumer. There's a power imbalance there. The power imbalance might be in the titles that people have. I'm the owner, I'm the president and CEO. There's a power dynamic there. So we're trying to assess that before the case gets scheduled for the session. But then the mediators, we have to think about that too. How do we use our ground rules and how do we enforce them to make sure that everyone in our mediation has time to talk, express themselves fully. If you're going to use the caucus dynamic, which is another tool, but you have to think about those things to help balance that power. Dealing with emotions and consider whether the emotions are allowing understanding of feelings. This is where your reframing may come. I hear that you're frustrated. I hear that you're upset. Would you like to say more about that? What is upsetting you specifically? One of the questions that I've learned to rely on is, what is the hardest part for you right now? You've heard this information. What is the hardest part for you? What is bubbling up for you right now? Just to let people express themselves emotionally and maybe process what they've heard or how they feel and put it in check. Okay, I hear you feel this way. I might restate that emotion. Would you like to continue or move to the next step? So the interesting thing about our service and what I hear from judges is that they want the mediation space to be a space where people can unpack and process those feelings. So even if there's no settlement and they go to court, they can deal with the issues from a legal perspective. And that may be something we're afraid of. And as mediators, we have to really think about how comfortable we are with that. But it's a part of the work. And I am suspecting that it's a growing part of the work as people struggle with their life, the things that are happening in their personal lives, as we have social discord and unrest. I hear more emotions even in the phone calls, in meetings that I go to. I'm hearing a lot of emotion. Managing the agenda and consider changing the order of items. This is something that I talk about in the 40-hour training, which we did last fall. People tell you what the issues are, but the mediators, you can control that agenda. Even if you start with a list of 5, say 2 items, 3 items, 5 items, and if you want to start with item number 1, you make that choice. But if you think it's best to now switch to item number 4, you can make that decision as mediators. Don't be afraid to do that. Good reasons to do that is that maybe the conversation is leaning towards item 4. Maybe there's some inklings of options for settlement for item 4. So don't be afraid to go to item 4. And likewise, if people are stuck in item 4, don't be afraid to take them back to item 1. Say, okay, I hear you, I've taken some notes, but I want us to go back to this item and have more discussion. I have questions about it. So you can control that agenda. I recognize that the flip chart is not present when we're doing mediation on Zoom. I keep the flip chart in mind. We still buy flip charts, not at high volume, but we still have them available for those occasions we do in-person services. But I want to remind you that in Zoom, you have the ability to share a screen and have a blank sheet of paper, Microsoft Word sheet of paper document that you can type on. You have the ability to use the notepad or I think it's a notepad in Zoom. It's a feature of Zoom where you can have a visual for people to see, and it can function just the way or very closely to the way that the flip chart did for in-person mediation. Sometimes typing that number out for people to see, sometimes helping people see that there are 3 options that came might help them to settle down and engage more productively. It is a toggling of a tool. So if you're not comfortable doing that, by no means, I'm not going to ask you to, feel forced to do that. But I want to remind you that that is a feature that you can use in the Zoom platform to help get to manage the case and to give people a focal point. The very reasons that we did it for in-person services, when you share the screen and give people a focal point, it can reduce or de-escalate the temperature a bit if that's needed. It can give people something visual to see that they're making progress, as we did for in-person services. But do not put your personal notes there. I will caution you on that. That part you still want to do privately, but the focal point, giving people something to focus on might be helpful. Listening actively is still a part of it. Even if you have to back up a bit and go back to their opening statement. Maybe the temperatures are rising, maybe things are becoming too flat, people are becoming not responding. You might want to go back to their opening statement. I recall you saying these things. Can you say more? Did I miss anything? I have clarifying questions. That listening part and going back to what you've heard earlier can be helpful. Affirming your understanding without the judgment is always helpful as a mediator. And I think this might, be my last slide here. I'm going to put in a plug for the books that our interest-based mediation is built on, Getting to Yes and Getting Past No. I think there may be new additions to the book. There should be, because they've been around for probably 30 years or longer. But they're still very useful books, simple, small books that are still useful. I'm still hearing about them from newer practitioners, that these are some simple readings that give them some clues on how to help people move along in a discussion, or especially the negotiation part of the mediation. At some point, people are negotiating. And if for those of us who've been at the negotiating table, be it you were in a unionized environment, you were in whatever kind of environment where you had to think about the needs and interests of the group that the contract was going to impact and all of that. A lot of the interest-based negotiation theory comes out of these 2 books. At the center, we've gotten a couple new books that we'll update and share. I'm thinking about Adrienne Renee Brown's book. I I have the book. I read the book last year and can't remember the title, but it's another powerful book that talks about facilitation and facilitating highly charged groups, facilitating large groups, groups of more than 4 or 5 people. And I found it to be very, very helpful. Um, so we'll make sure that book is shared, and it'll probably come to me before we end this discussion. We are looking to purchase What is Your Proposal? Bill Eadie's book, who did the high conflict lunch and learns last year. I have not done that yet. There's been a delay because of me, but we want to get that book in the office, and there'll be an email on how we get the book distributed. That's where I got stuck. I can buy these books, then they're going to sit here. So how do we get that into your hands? And we want to have a book discussion, maybe at the October Lunch and Learn, to talk about the techniques that he puts in his book that he may have touched on in the presentation, but we want to take a deeper dive as a group. I think it's essential that we continue to build our toolkit in working with cases. It doesn't matter how simple the case may appear, conflict in the human dynamic of managing conflict has become more, I think, complex. I'm just going to get a quick drink of water. The next point, focus on workability and not truth or fact finding or corroborating the truth. I think is an important tool. Stories do not always match up, and that's just life. I was rereading some content on the restorative justice side about victims and survivors of harm, and the author writes in there that people who've had an experience in conflict, trauma, what have you, don't often remember the facts of the story the same as it actually happened. And if they tell the story multiple times, each time the story may sound a bit different just because of how our bodies process those experiences. It was a reminder to me that sometimes we get stuck on people telling the truth of what we think their truth ought to be, and we want to have all the facts and we want to corroborate it with the other party, and it doesn't happen. Well, if that is where our focus is, we're not finding where the common interests may be, the workability may be, our questioning will be different. So if we focus on what is working or what can be workable, then even if it's we agree, sounds like you've had different perspectives of what happened, but we do agree that something did occur. Can we just focus on how we move forward from that occurrence? What are some ideas to reach for this to reach a settlement for you? What do you need in order for this to go away? What is workable? So think about that. So, if that's where your mind is drifting, see if you can catch yourself and get back to thinking about what's workable. And the last point for this is maintaining a good attitude and remaining non-judgmental. Not having an assumption of what the outcome ought to be, and believe that the people can resolve their own disputes better than some decision maker could. I think this point alone is what drew me to mediation and not law school. This point is what kept me going at the DRC for as long as I have. I believe that people have the ability to solve their problems if they're given the platform and the correct tools. And we've seen that. I think Liz said something happened at the end of the case that she experienced a few days ago. People need an opportunity to not be judged, to be heard, and to be engaged in a very productive and humane way. And they can reach a conclusion that they can live with, even if that means no settlement, even when there is no settlement. And I know that's hard to hear. You're donating your time, You want a settlement. The DRC is not grading you on settlement. The settlement rate, our settlement rate since I've been director has been between 66 and 73% consistently since I took the director's role at the DRC in 2007. So when it's at the height at 73, when it starts to slip below 70, we start thinking about what's going on. What shifts can we make in our program to help us stay there? But that is really not a bad place to be when you think about it consistently. And the courts, the magistrates and judges, I'll stop my share right now. The magistrate and judges continue these programs because they are satisfied with our work product. So this is not about settlement for me. In fact, when mediators tell me I settle 100% of the cases, my antenna goes up because I'm wondering, what are you doing in that room, in that space? Are you advising people? Are you pushing your own agenda? Are you using your own position of power to get people to settle? That is not the work that we're supposed to do. And quite frankly, that's not the insurance, the liability insurance that we pay for. We are a neutral third party. So I don't want anyone to come back and say, mediator X told me to do this and it didn't work. And now I want the DRC to be responsible for the damages. That's not the kind of insurance that we pay for. We're not set up to give people advisement and opinions about the outcomes of their case. So I'm going to take a breath and let you all respond and react to that. Anyone? Any reflection? And if not, this is going to be the quickest brown lunch and learn we've ever had. Yes, Greta.
Are mediators using caucus more frequently on Zoom than they used to in person? I'm just curious about that because it seems as though sometimes you get to the point faster when you can actually talk to people privately and find out what do they really want, as opposed to what are they saying in a negotiating format.
Great question. That is one of our tools. Anyone have a response or a reaction to that? Well, I encourage using the caucus if you know why you're caucusing. We want to keep people together. We want them to hear each other. All of those principles are still there. But in Zoom, because there's so much posturing that can be done in Zoom, that tool might be pretty handy to do just what Greta has suggested. The coordinators are on the screen with you, even if they shut down they're off camera, they're there and they can help manage that. What I did when I was coordinating the case, I put the caucus person stayed on the screen and the other person went into the waiting room. That just was less complicated than doing the breakouts. However, Cassie suggests breakouts when she can pre-design your breakout rooms and move people to breakout rooms for you if you want to, including you, if you want to go into breakout rooms to caucus. So don't think it shouldn't be done or can't be done because we're in a virtual space. It can be done. Yes, Phil, you have something to add to that?
Well, this issue of caucus versus joint session is age old, and it's troubling to lots of people who were trained to mediate in joint session, and back then before the virtual forum, it was easier to distinguish joint session from caucus because everybody started sitting usually everybody started sitting around a table. Mm-hmm. And then a determination was made about how the mediation ought to be structured and whether it ought to be conducted in a combination of joint session and caucus or entirely in caucus. And there's lots of reasons for that. the troubling aspect of that issue to me today is folks who mediate exclusively in caucus. And in that context, what we see very often are mediators who are obligated to a resolution. That's what, and more often than not, this involves mediations that include attorneys. That's what the attorneys want. They want a resolution. Not really sure sometimes whether that's what the parties want. But what we hear is that courts are very satisfied with that sort of dynamic because they like resolution. They like to have things resolved. And as you pointed out, Belinda, that's really not our job. Our job is to provide a safe, objective opportunity for people to be heard, to make determinations on their own, to construct their own resolution that satisfies their needs and their interests. So when I hear about mediators who employ exclusively the caucus model, I'm skeptical of that. I don't know if I'm kind of suspicious of that because I don't know what happens. How can you know that what's happening isn't the product of, I'll use the word coercion, that's probably not right, or, influence of some sort or arm twisting of some sort. People who have mediated with me know that I can try at least to encourage resolution. And sometimes I'm sure that sounds like or feels like arm twisting. I hope, and in my own reflection, I don't think it is, but so it's assertive. I cop to that. I admit it. But keeping that, as you said, keeping that neutrality in mind, that objective, non-biased approach to things, and listening to people, allowing them to develop their own, is a lot more satisfactory and a lot more durable in the long run. And that's the kind of thing that prevents those that kind of susceptibility to claims by folks and disappointment that we hear when somebody kind of forces them in one direction or another. Try not to do that. So, I was trained in joint session. I tell people that's where I start. And I'm pretty serious about that.
Thank you, Phil, for that. That's my school of thought. That was my learning and teaching, that we bring people together so they can hear each other. And for those who don't know, I learned this work academically in graduate school in the mid to late 90s. I was in grad school for dispute resolution. And everything that I learned academically was about, we are different from going to court. We want people to talk to each other. We want people to hear each other. And when folks go immediately into caucus, I would label that as a negotiation. So that's strictly negotiation. That is not what mediation is founded on. It's a technique that we can use. And this is coming up in some of our cases. Parties are asking that they be separated immediately. And we're trying to figure out, how do we honor their need and wishes, but stay true to the tenets of this work? Does being separated immediately meaning that they cannot hear the opening statement of the mediators? We are also, which is a very important step, like the mediators, you set the tone. So we want people to hear that together. We're also concerned about safety. There's been even on with cyberbullying and all of that, we have to be concerned about how people see each other on screen and what that is triggering. And I think if we are honest, and this is, I'm seeing it in all aspects of the DRC, higher levels of anxiety about just human dynamics, dealing with the public. I don't know. I'm sure this is very much the pandemic where we were separated and isolated, and we have a group of people that are not handling the re-engagement with people very well, like answering phones, communicating. I think the advent of social media and digital communication has really interrupted and helped and is devolving our communication structure. So all of that is happening as we try to pull together this process or sustain a process where people get to talk to each other. I think it's pretty challenging right now. So I see 3 hands up and I want to get them all. Mary, Robin, and then Kathy. And I don't know whose hand was first, but that's how they're on my screen. Go ahead, Mary.
Well, hi. I had a different experience starting out in the tribal court. I always thought it maybe had to do is because the belief in that culture was that there are no bad people, there are only good people who do bad things. So there was no antagonism when they came in. Always they found their own solutions, which sometimes were very different. A lot of the times, or most times, the problems brought to the court were different than when it presented individually. And that made listening so much more important. And the way you would speak during the talking would be very different. When I came into Ypsilanti, into the white culture, it was much more antagonistic. And that idea of that you could speak freely didn't exist. And it was very hard. It was my point to make that I had to know that they could do this because I had seen it done in other places. So most of the time, the resolutions are just so different than we would have expected in our culture from the problems, or they come up with ideas that are not what the court expected. And a lot of times it's because they are confined by the court expectations with the language the court has to use to define the issues. So as I learned all this, my approach is to make that air open for them and ask questions when they mention them. You said the problem is this. What do you see the problem? Or they suggested the problem's that. How would you respond to that? So it opens the field up to where they can settle their own problems. That's been my experience.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. And I agree. Having spent time with the tribe over the years, their just perspective about community and conflict is just so different, and it's hard, and it makes it harder for the work that we do, especially when have adopted their principles and values and trying to infuse it. That infusion is still happening. We haven't gotten there yet. Robin.
Yes, I just wanted to speak to the discussion we were starting to have about caucusing or not. And my thoughts about that is that there's a limited place for it, but when it's used too much or used too soon, it's often used to try to get the mediator on the side of one party or another. And that can be, whether perceived or real, can be very counterproductive and can destroy the process. I think it's useful when there are very specific negotiating points, like, how far would you go financially or something like that, where it can be very useful to know where someone stands and what they might be willing to propose. But if it has any inkling of a perception of bias or favoritism, it can just ruin everything. And yeah, this past year, I've been mostly mediating within my co-housing community and less with the DRC, although I'm here because I want to get back into that as well. And there it's fraught with the issue that we're all friends and neighbors, and we have a conflict resolution group of 3. And I think our greatest challenge is maintaining objectivity and neutrality, and how to do that among a group that knows one another. And some of those lessons learned can help me in other places as well. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. Yeah, we have to always be alert around that, bias is more about, in my opinion, is more about the perception and not that we're actually doing anything to create it. And that perception of bias can destroy a mediation. It can just really shut it down. So we have to be clear, and we talk about this in training. If we're going to caucus, you need to have a clear reason why you're caucusing. There's a clear reason for using that technique. Caucusing just because you want to keep the party separated, you want efficiency, to me, it's not a strong reason to caucus. I can wrap this up in, a half hour if I separate these people and go back and forth and just, take proposals back and forth. That is not a good reason to caucus, in my opinion. Kathy.
Yeah, so I have something that's a little different. The thing that really troubles me in a mediation is when the parties aren't listening to each other. They've each talked and we've let them talk and you've asked questions and they haven't moved an inch because they haven't heard each other. So I don't know if you have any techniques in that particular situation, but I would be open to it.
Where the parties are not hearing each other.
Right.
Yeah. So some other techniques that are not in our manual, but people have brought them forward, is that one technique that comes to mind, someone talked about this in our last training. Do we ask party A to repeat what they heard party B say? What did you hear that person say? How does it make you feel? And then as they're repeating what's being said, they're also being edited. No, that the party did not say that. The party said this. So that might be something to help people hear each other. And the person, party B, the speaker, will also edit. No, I didn't say that. You misheard. So that might and we have to figure out our comfort level in that. Are we losing control as they're editing each other? Or are we giving them a space where they can have this discussion around words and language and the interpretation of it? And I think for some cases, especially when relationships have been long standing, friendships, so we get some of in the RJ space, we get these good friends who, been friends for years, then the friendship falls apart and then it's a court case and all of this kind of stuff. So that might be a technique to help people hear each other. Some other practitioners that I've been in touch with over the years, they use writing. Can you write what you heard? So in that caucus, they might be talking about some stuff, then they want the party to write it down and get prepared to go back to the joint session and express it themselves. So, Mary, your hand is up and I see something in the chat.
Yeah, to me, what we just described here is what I see is we don't really have the problem defined. There was something taken to the court called it this, and they're not in agreement that that's the issue. And until you find out what each one of them needs to have solved, it isn't going to happen. And it might not sound at all what the court said, but if they come to where they're both happy and can go on in life happily, that's what we're here to do. And the court seems to accept any of those other things that we come up with as how to solve this, how to make these two people get along. So
yeah,
to me, that's an indication we need to know more.
Yeah, so that listening and reframing and not getting stuck on what we see on the court documents too.
Right.
So even in the example that I used, it was a small claims lawsuit of a certain dollar amount, because in our civil court, it's about a transaction of money. everything has a dollar amount. But when they talk to each other through their opening statements and through lots of questioning, the mediators questioned, it wasn't just the dollar amount. Yeah, the person wanted the work to be completed, but it was also about getting prepared for the summer season when the grandchildren come to visit in the summer and having activities for them to do. It was a lot of anxiety attached to that. I don't think the magistrate would have heard that or cared. It would have been like, what was the contract that was signed? What happened? Those tangible things of evidence. It wasn't about, the grandparents really wanting to have this wonderful summer season with the grandchildren. So, yeah.
I had one where it came to the court as a divorce. And it wasn't that at all. She just wanted him to treat her differently in this way.
Mhm.
And they had no other problems. He couldn't understand. He didn't know she felt that way. And she just said, why can't he say good morning to me? Such a simple thing and easy to come up with an agreement.
Yeah.
But it wasn't at all the issue brought to the court.
Yeah. I have a few things in the chat and I just want to demonstrate it. One is how to use the whiteboard. We can spend some time on doing it, but I'm going to do a very quick demonstration. So I am hosting this Zoom session. I share my screen. On this new screen that comes up, it shows screens, documents, advance. Hit the documents, select the whiteboard, and share it. No, didn't work, sorry. But there's a way to share the screen. Oh, no, let me try the note. It's not working, sorry. But there's a way in your screen share that you can pick a document, a plain sheet of paper even, that is on your screen and you can share it. So it looks like we have to sign into Zoom to do that. So as a staff, we're gonna work through that to make sure that our licensee captures that and we're not paying extra fees. But we'll do a walkthrough of how that works. Oh, Anika's doing it. Thank you, Anika.
No, actually, I had to try it. So I just on the more button, I picked whiteboard and new whiteboard.
Oh, okay,
Oh,
great.
Anyway, I guess Anika did do
Okay.
something.
I'm sorry. I was just trying it out. I'm so
Okay.
sorry. And I also want to say for everyone, your coordinators, your mediation coordinators will absolutely do this for you and with you. So
Yeah.
they, Cassie knows we all know how to do this.
Yep. Great. Thank you. I didn't know how to do it. Thank you. You can stop your share. Thank you, Anika. So you can do that under the More tab, Craig, you said?
Yeah, that's where I found it.
Okay,
Or
great.
if
great.
it's not on the basic menu line of other things, then
Okay,
more.
okay. Okay, Anika, you wanna
Thank you.
stop it? Okay, thank you. So we can practice with that. The staff know how to do it. Obviously, I don't. But that's okay because I'm typically not with you. But let's practice that though, and I'll practice it too just to get used to it. And I'm not saying that you must do it. I'm saying that it's a technique that could help your mediation. So think about doing that. But thank you for that question about practicing. And let's build that into our lunch and learns, build that into continuing ed just as a refresh so that people can get used to it. I have a question. When you ask for caucus, do you explain the reason? Yes. We talk about caucus as a private meeting. It is a way for the mediators to talk one-on with each of you separately. And in that caucus is also confidential. We'll take notes so that people can know what's happening. And the mediators decide who to caucus with first. And we let them know that the other party will have the opportunity to caucus as well. So our suggestion at our center is that if you caucus with one person, caucus with all. And it's not about equal time, it's about opportunity, equitable opportunity to give people a chance to talk with you one-on-one about what might be underlying, the underlying issue for them. It might be about clarifying, it might be explanation of feelings. Or it might be something as simple as we just want to check in and see how you're feeling about the session so far. Any feedback? You're feeling okay? You ready to go back out? It may take 30 seconds, but people need to have an opportunity to do it. If you do it with one, do it with all. When parties request caucus, do you ask them their reason? I would say yes. If people want a caucus, especially if in the intake phase of the case, if they're saying, I do not want to be on the screen with this person, we need to explore that because we're looking for safety. We're asking about safety. Is there a reason that you cannot be on the screen? So think about cases where people live in the same dwelling and they're going to be in mediation. You know, what's going on? Can they go back to that same house as roommates, family, or whatever? We have to, you know, we want to get a pulse of what the safety dynamic might be, what the concerns may be, and there might be some unique issues, some unique accommodations. We've had a party to a case where the party just had high level of anxiety and just felt that being on a screen with everyone was just too much to process and to consume. We were okay with that because we are seeing that more often than not. People have high levels of anxiety. I like the idea that we can also use it as an opportunity to, you know, I say co-create what this process will look like. So even if in that moment I need to be separate, we can talk about, well, for the first part, everyone will be on the screen with the mediators to do this. Then at some point you can separate, you know, so we have to, I think we have the ability to give people a little space to help us think about that. Reframing comes to mind and confirm a collective understanding of what the conflict is. I agree. As a person before COVID, I answered the phone quite a bit. And it was interesting, especially on Friday afternoons, I would be in the office alone very often. And people will call in about, you know, landlord tenant, mostly landlord tenant situations. But it was interesting to me that people could not articulate what the conflict was. They were being sued, or they wanted to sue, or they have a summons to be in court, but they weren't even sure what the conflict was about. They could not articulate what their issue was. I would like to use your service with this other person. Well, what is the concern that you have with the other person? They could not put it in words. I think a missing piece in the community dispute resolution space is conflict coaching. Phil, I think the center in Jackson does a little bit of that. Am I correct? You're on mute. I think I've talked to Craig about that. You're mute. Well, I don't know how to unmute.
The center in Jackson does what,
Do
Belinda?
they do conflict coaching in Jackson?
Yeah, Tiffany Stanley has taken that on as a like a personal challenge and is very involved with that.
Yeah, I thought I spoke to the two of Craig and Tiffany about that. I think it's a missing element in the community dispute resolution space. People don't know how to articulate themselves around it. So it's something that we're loosely thinking about. I'm not making any commitments, but it's something, and I think Tiffany and I talked about it. I think I wanted to go to one of her trainings to see what it's about. Let's see. Any other questions? All right, Cassie, thank you for being here. I know you have to hop off for your case. Good to see you today.
That wasn't me. I'm here, right? I'm here. I can
Oh.
stay.
Oh, okay.
But no, my comment is about a case coming up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
That's
thought
okay.
you were saying you had a case right now. You had to go. Go ahead. Approaching. Oh, you have a request for a shuttle. Who are the mediators? So if you've assigned mediators, I think you all should have a discussion.
I have not for that particular date. It's a little bit, it's farther out. I haven't
Yeah.
rounded it up yet for that.
Yeah. So a response to that is it didn't work. So we need to know why they're requesting to be separated. And we have to determine if it is the right thing to do, you know, and if they can be together while the mediators do their thing. And we also want the mediators to have some control of the process as well. And so if there's some legitimate reasons, share it with the mediators. Otherwise, maybe we shouldn't. Greta, you want to jump in on that one?
The one that I was a part of was recent, and I think the other mediator isn't on right now, but it was a request by one party. They had been to some form of mediation before, and they were just shouted down all the time. And so explicitly said, I do not want to be in the same space with this person.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't work, because every time we would go back to one of the parties, it was as if nothing had happened. We were back at square one. And it just kept prolonging. And ultimately then the person who was not the one who requested a shuttle began saying, oh, you're not explaining this properly. You're not doing it right. Or she would understand.
Mm-hmm.
But it was very clear that no, that was not the case at all. So it came apart, and we called it after a while. But there was so much stuff. So it was a family, and it was bad feeling, and it appeared to be about money, and it wasn't about money at all. And the wheels just came off after a while.
Yeah. So that is the biggest, I wouldn't say biggest, but that is a big concern about doing shuttle mediation. You as a third party are vocalizing what the party said. In the expectation is that you're going to parrot it word for word, and you may or may not. Communication, as we know, is much more than words. Communication, you know, what, 20% of communication is words, the rest is listening. Is that the ratio that I've heard before? So I think there's some big risk in setting things up to be shuttle. Now, we have had experience where there was a request to be separated, and the parties had attorneys, and the attorneys wanted to be separated. So each attorney and their client will be in a breakout room, and the mediators will go back and forth. And there was some real discussion internally at the DRC, should we honor that request or not? And where we landed was that let's honor the request within the context of them understanding at some point you got to come together in this process. So that's where I loosely say co-creation. How do we co-create a pathway for people to use this process? We have a little bit of ability to do that. We still control the process. And in doing so, we can create some safety and trust with the process that they can come together. And we know that they're being advised by their attorneys, which is different from what Greta is saying. In small claims, there are no attorneys. So we have to assume that there's some safety in that negotiation construct, having counsel. Not all of our cases will have attorneys. So it's getting a little trickier. At the end of the day, I think it's getting a little trickier. What I don't want to give up, and this is maybe more of an opinion, personal thing than not, is having a case where everything is done, people are not talking to each other or hearing each other. I'm not convinced that you'll get a clear, I guess you can, but will you get a clear agreement if there seems to be one? How much editing, how much back and forth will you be working on that? So I just think we give up some things by keeping people separate for the whole time. And and I'm also thinking about the safety in mediation, which is part of our standards of conduct. If the parties are not safe, maybe they shouldn't be mediating. Maybe that's the real question for us. The court is going to send them to us because the court is just managing their docket sometimes. And if the parties are expressing that they are not safe, we need to be concerned about that. And maybe that is what we're making a decision about. They're not safe and they cannot mediate together. This case is not appropriate for mediation. That's all we're saying. And that can happen in a small claims case as well. Think about our standards of conduct. People need to be we're competent about the process. We need people to be capable of engaging in the process and signing agreements. And if they're not able to do that, we should not be mediating. Anika put something, it's very important to try to understand by any and both parties why shuttle mediation is
Yeah, that's
requested
just, I
to
just wanted
determine
to
how-
echo what
yeah,
you said, Belinda.
yeah,
Like,
thank you.
the coordinator and you as mediators can ask the parties, why are you can you explain to us what's happening for you as to why this needs to happen? Because just as Belinda said, safety could be an issue. I've been in mediations, not small claims, of course, as Belinda said, but domestic relations where one party would say, I feel like I cannot advocate for myself, even if I see the other person, because we primarily do everything on Zoom, primarily, right? And hearing that, then you can even go in further to kind of ask, are there any safety concerns? It could just be, that particular case, that party said, it's not anything having to do with physical safety, it's emotional safety, and I just can't, I don't think I can do this if I see that other person. So I really want to do shuttle. So, we talked it through. We also talked through with the other party, and the other party was amenable to doing shuttle and recognize that the other party would likely have requested shuttle mediation and was fine with it. If it wasn't that case, we would actually try to probably have a shuttle mediation, try to figure out if we can bring them together. Because when somebody says, I can't engage, I am concerned about safety. That might not be specifically my definition, but whatever definition of the parties, that's how they're coming into the space. And I don't want to alienate them. I don't want to create a feeling of bias or judgment based on that. So that's why, for me, my trigger is to say, okay, let's at least discuss what shuttle mediation could look like. And I think, Greta, was it you was saying that sometimes the parties need to have a bigger explanation of what that could look like, because they're going to say, you're not really explaining what's happening. And I mean, they don't know the world we live in. They're not practicing in this. They're not living in this. This is maybe their first time engaging in it, or maybe they've had experience with mediation and that was one time and they thought it worked there. But this is going to be a different animal, based on whatever cases they're bringing forward. So I try not to alienate the parties by saying, we're not going to do it the way that you've asked to do it, because we think this. I've seen that fail horribly. I think, just as I said before in the chat to Belinda, I think it's great to try to at least talk about what they want, and then, as Belinda said, work to getting them into a space together and recognizing the purpose of mediation is to actually get you to engage, right? If you can, as best as you can. My 2 cents.
Thank you, Anika. And Greta, did you have your hand up? I think I saw it.
Oh, I just have to clarify that the charge that the mediators were not explaining clearly enough to the other party, or they would of course fall in line, came at about the 4-hour point. And my co-mediator recognized that there was some gaslighting going on, and she is the one who said, I think we've explored this enough, be on your way, folks.
Yeah. That ownership of the process, I'm not asking any of you to give up, what the process looks like, but know that there's some flexibility in it to co-create it, to address the needs of participants, to explore those needs further. What I don't want you to do is feel like you have to, it's binary, do it my way or no way. I don't want us to fall in that. And we have to recognize that we have a new age of folks who are coming to mediation. Millennials, I think the intergenerational aspect of our work is more, it needs to be talked about more. And I think we're just trying not to talk about it, but it's present. In our office, we have We no longer have a baby boomer in the office, so I might be the oldest person. Can you believe that? I'm the oldest person in the office. We have millennials. And I used to be the youngest person in the office, right? Because we had boomers. So we have millennials, young millennials, and I don't know where millennials cut off, but we have a 30-year-old. And that's not to say anything negative about that, but there's a generational thing that's emerging all by itself. And then we have volunteers who many of our volunteers are part of the baby boomer generation. Clients, we're going to see that change in our clientele, right? Who's coming to mediation? We've been invited to 2 law school classrooms in the next, I think one is next week, where we have these young professionals, 2nd and 3rd year law students who want to explore alternative dispute resolution because they know the likelihood of them arguing a case in court is very low. They already know that. That's not happening. Wherever they go, they might be doing corporate work, policy work, contract work, and those who want to go on to public defense, they know that they may be doing restorative justice, like they are already being exposed to this. So things are going to look different on the ground, and their vocabulary is a little different from mine. I started my journey in the mid-90s. Some of the words that they use, I'm like, what does that mean? So it's just it's just taking on another spin culturally, I think, through the generations. So we have to get prepared for more of maybe this co-creation piece, not abandoning the framework of and the tenets of what this work is about, but giving them space, to suggest, to request something that they might need in order to move forward in the process. I was surprised. I think, Andy, with your case, we had 2 probably in their 20s. It was about a roommate situation. So okay, we actually did it. We're almost 1 o'clock. Any other questions or final remarks? I'm going to reiterate that we have events happening, training events happening this year. It's on our website. I hope that if you know someone, if you want to come to some of these other trainings, please respond. And if you know someone who wants to get involved, send them our way. We're doing our very best to keep our training at a lower cost to no cost. We really are. We don't want cost to be a barrier. We have the Restorative Justice Summit coming up in October. It'll be in a few seasons away, our first time doing it. So we're working hard to make it a good experience for everyone involved. So information will be coming out real soon to get registrations and all of that. We just sealed up the contract with the Eagle Crest Hotel in Ypsilanti so that guests could stay there overnight. So that was another layer to organizing this that we had to do. So a lot of fun things are coming up at the DRC. We hope that you stay engaged. And for those who do small claims, just know that Cassie and Stephanie are really working on cases are coming through. It feels like 3-4 days a week. We're getting a new email from somebody with a new case or a short docket of cases. So things will be coming through. Okay, thank you all for your time. Good to see you all. And if you're interested in being on the board or on a committee, let me know. We have space for you to engage and plug in other ways as well. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kathy.